Hi there. This is the introduction to my overall series of videos covering The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, the Lord of the Rings Second Age prequel show on Amazon Prime. I've explained this that my channel is primarily on the Game of Thrones franchise, World of Westeros, so now I'm busy with the House of the Dragon, Dance of the Dragons prequel series. But because I'm already familiar with The Lord of the Rings, I can cover this as a secondary project that I started out as a Tolkien fan, that I read the whole book series right before the books came out. In the late 90s, I read everything, and not just The Lord of the Rings, but, I read the Silmarillion. I read the print off of it 25 years ago, but I knew it very well when the original movies were coming out. So I'm not a giant expert, but I think I could have a conversation about it. Like someone really going through the phases of writing material, the Histories of Middle-earth series, which is the phases of writing that Tolkien went through behind the scenes. That's behind the scenes, picking things apart on a scholarly level. I try to go by just the print story stuff. I have the Atlas of Middle-earth, I have Unfinished Tales, Silmarillion was great, but I know enough of it off the top of my head that I don't need to. What's the Silmarillion? Like, I know that pretty well that I could describe it in enough detail. I wouldn't be able to compete with, like, Tom Shippey or something, or you're someone who's a really hardcore scholar, but on a broad level, for the purposes of a YouTube reaction, I know my stuff pretty well. That in Lord of the Rings terms, I am not an Elrond, but I'm kind of at a older Bilbo level where he's in Bag End and he's reading and writing books about the story translations from the Elvish. I'm not an Elrond level guy, but like Bilbo is, an amateur historian. Yeah, I've read enough that I could have a conversation about it. The real experts are, of course, the OneRing.net, the hardcore of this fandom. Other big channels I like that have covered this very well are In Deep Geek, Nerd of the Rings, Fellowship of Fans, are the ones I'm watching that are covering this on a professional level. It's just I felt like remarking on this in videos, mostly audio stuff, because I'm already watching it privately. I might as well go, oh, by the way, here's my thoughts on this. So just as a side project, because I know enough off the top of my head, I can do this pretty well. If you remember, I have been covering this since the first teaser trailer came out with the Super Bowl, and I had a pretty extensive write-up about that back in February, which is right before Valentine's Day. And what surprised me is we knew almost nothing about this series, that Amazon's way of handling this was not productive at all. They handle this very poorly. Their idea was the less we talk about it, the less people will have to criticize because they'll nitpick everything. Well, that just makes people more mad. If you do it for too long, it seems like you're hiding something. So this was officially not a good promo strategy, that they thought the name Lord of the Rings alone was enough to promote it, when you need to be saying who these specific characters are leading into season one. Granted, most of them are original characters just due to the nature of it. They should have done this so much better. I think of it how the House of the Dragon was doing promotional stuff. They put out much clearer teaser trailers that conveyed much more of the story they were trying to achieve. This is a succession crisis with Rhaenyra, but she's a woman, so people are going to challenge it, and the king remarried, all of that. The most we ever really heard was last October, when they explained that, well, there's going to be racial diversity in it, but I didn't really have a problem with that, nor did the book sites. The people yelling about this are rarely the purists, because we know that, like, there are 7 dwarf clans, and we only ever really saw 3 of them. Maybe one of the other 4 who are from Harad look black. Maybe the ones in the east look Asian. We never even saw all 7 dwarf clans. And, like, video games and RPGs already played around with that, so I don't have an issue with that. There were already people of color in it, on the fringes of the story, with Harad and the Easterlings and stuff. You're surprised that dwarves look like that too. I already went over all this. That, like, these aren't hobbits. These are the proto-hobbit Harfoots. They're not in the Shire. They're in the east, in Wilderland, in Rovanion, and they this is pretty much what the prologue did. That, well, they're migrating, and in real life terms, this is just, where were humans 4,000 years ago? This is like when the Proto-Indo-Europeans hadn't even split off from all the other groups yet, and they're just migrating around Central Asia or something. Or in biblical terms, this is like Tower of Babel times. And I said that before, that this is so long ago and such a different part of the world that, yeah, they couldn't do that because it could be anything. Or maybe elves who are in the south, Sylvan elves who are a different tribe in the south, don't look white or something. I never had a problem with that because book fans know how little we do know. That there's points where Tolkien just gives broad sketches of things. And it's weird how there's been a lot more of a toxic backlash to the racial casting in this than there was in House of the Dragon. I think because people are more tied to it's not even a specific character they race swapped, it's original characters. That's the weird thing. But I wouldn't call them toxic fans because they're not fans. Overall, most people I've seen, in my personal experience, are strangers who came in the room to yell about race stuff because they're racists who exist online who never even read the source material. I do not see purist sites really reacting against that. There is no purist base against this because they're original characters. And I said back last October that Wondering.net, they said, well, our biggest concern isn't that there's black hobbits because that explanation makes sense to us, that it's thousands of years ago. Our problem is that there are no stories about the proto-hobbits thousands of years ago, so anything you do has to be original characters, regardless of their race. That we are wary of creating new characters. But, okay, that's the nature of the beast, that you have to make it up whether they're good or bad. Like, a lot of the Númenórean stuff they have to make up. So, we'll see what happens with that, and I hope they're not heavy-handed with it, but I think part of this is just that Tolkien is put on such a pedestal, all of his works, that that some people view that as sacred. It's just people need to hate on something. Consider what happened with Star Wars with the Kenobi show, where you've established that black humans exist in this world, and they made an original character, Reva, for the third sister Inquisitor, and people were shouting at it for being woke and stuff when it's an original character. How is the mere presence of it? It's not contradicting anything. They just don't like black people. That they need to yell about that, or women for that matter. A lot of people also yell, and I wonder if it's the same crowd, were yelling about Galadriel. No, it couldn't be the same crowd, because I saw other people who were confused by this, legitimately confused. Wait, was Galadriel always a warrior? In good faith asking that. And yeah, hardcore book fans will go, yeah, that's how they describe her in the Silmarillion. I mean, broadly. So, In Deep Geek already did like a short 10-minute video that explained that more clearly than I could, with citations, with better editing, that if you're really familiar with the source stuff, we know you need to invent things. It's the key distinction here is, are you contradicting something, or are you filling in gaps that we never knew about? Like, I would watch, like, a show set around Umbar and Harad, dealing with them being colonized by the Númenóreans, and, like, politics with the various fiefdoms and kingdoms in Harad. That would be interesting to me, even though it would be almost entirely invention, and it doesn't even matter to me that most of the cast wouldn't be white because it's set in Harad. Like, we know that. So, due to stuff going on in the world and anti-globalization stuff, people just feel like yelling about race things now. And if it's a more prominent title, they yell more. This has no real basis in anything. I've already said all of this, that I don't have a problem if it doesn't contradict anything, and there's a lot we didn't know, so they could, like, we never saw every dwarf clan, so I'm okay with that. That was the first thing we ever really knew of back in October, and really the first we really knew was when the Super Bowl teaser came out. And I nearly gave up on the show after that, because it was a terrible teaser, that you put out almost nothing about your show, gave an incoherent 60-second teaser, and then didn't put out any new material for months. What did you think was going to happen? What won me back, I already explained this, was later that night, they posted up the showrunners posted up a longer interview with Vanity Fair saying, this is what we're trying to do story-wise. I went, oh, okay. And I made a whole video titled Incoherent Super Bowl Teaser Hides Surprisingly Book Faithful Story. Okay, I see what you're going for here. They felt like they were trying, that this wasn't... Now, I don't really have much faith in Amazon, the company, but I think the showrunners they put in charge do want to do a good job, because, they're nerds too. But Amazon itself just sees that it's a supplement to their shipping business. And other than a handful of high-profile things like Lord of the Rings, The Boys, Invincible, they're just stumbling into this. They have their platform crashes all the time. And I read this whole great article, I'll link below, of how this giant gamble Amazon is doing, and unless this becomes the most successful TV show in history, they're not going to make their money back. And it'll be considered a failure, even if it's the top show of the year. It needs to be a mega hit that everyone talks about and falls in love with. And why did you need to set that they thought this was their Star Wars? They said in word for word, this is our Game of Thrones. And it's hard to do that artificially, and even if you do, you don't bank on it, because you can't reliably know that. I've heard people throwing around the figure that this cost $1 billion. It depends on how you count, if you count like the marketing money and stuff, but it's actually around $700 million is what the number I've heard. House of the Dragon cost $200 million for its first season, though it uses a lot less CGI. The scale is different, because it's low fantasy versus high fantasy. That this costs 3 times as much as House of the Dragon, which has a budget comparable to what they were doing in the later Game of Thrones seasons. It's the most expensive. That was the selling point for 6 months or so. For like 2 years, actually, it's the most expensive TV show in history. How do you know if that's any good? Like, even other mega projects that are just dumping money on it, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, that's not a guarantee. And that was the selling point for like 2 years. And based on the trailers and stuff, it does look very nice. But after the teaser trailer came out, I made a whole video going over this in some detail. Okay, we've been hearing about this since 2018. 4 years later, we have some idea of what they're doing story-wise, because they need to cobble it together. That there's 3 main storylines. There's the High Elves in Lindon, there's the Harfoots in the east, and there's the Southlands. The Harfoots one I was a little wary on, but okay, people expect to see what the Hobbits are up to, and it's as long as it's a slice of life thing and not them doing something huge, like freeing Sauron, I won't be too upset. And the Lindon one really crosses over into 2 other things, that Galadriel's going to end up going to Numenor, and Elrond's going to be sent as an envoy to Khazad-dûm. Which, fine, I'd like to see Khazad-dûm in its prime. This probably could have happened in the Second Age. The Numenor stuff is probably what I'm worried the most about, because there's the most potential for contradiction. Because that's one of the few points where we have a decent amount of source material. Like, they don't describe Isildur having a sister, but, maybe she died. So I'm okay with it. We'll see what they do with that. But the Numenor stuff that's where you could contradict source material versus, hey, we invented some Harfoots in the east, and they're actually a mix of tribes who are different races. Okay, they're all original characters, so they're not contradicting anything. We don't know that much about Hobbit history. But the one we knew the least about was the Southlands stuff, and I'll get back to that. That up through then, that gets us through the first teaser. Maybe wondering why I haven't been covering this that much the past 6 months since the big, I think, pretty good video. I rewatch it. It's a pretty decent video I did on summarizing the Super Bowl weekend of the bad teaser combined with the really good write-up in Vanity Fair. I remember it very clearly because it was like the day after... It was the Tuesday after the Super Bowl. It was right after I posted up that video. I took my cat to the vet because he hadn't been eating, and I thought he had a bladder infection, and they said he has a congenital heart condition, he has a year to live. And he's 5. And he died a month later. It was very fast. So I didn't get any work on this done in February for a month, and then a month after he died, I said, officially, I'm just on break. I can't do anything. I'm too shot. So I lost 2 months of work there. up until about when what shook me out of my sabbatical was when the House of the Dragon's second teaser came out May 5th. So between right after this teaser, Lord of the Rings teaser came out with the Super Bowl mid-February and May 5th, I lost 2 months. And because I'm primarily a House of the Dragon thing, that's what I was covering more, because I knew Lord of the Rings has people covering it. House of the Dragon needed people to drum up support for it because it was considered a dead franchise. So the time I would have devoted to doing Lord of the Rings stuff was like San Diego Comic-Con through August. From Comic-Con was last week of July through the House of the Dragon premiere on August 21st. There's a solid month, which I always thought, that's when I'm going to do more Lord of the Rings stuff. My whole schedule got bumped back because death in the family, so I was covering House of the Dragon stuff down to the wire, and I managed to catch up just as it came out when I put out those videos on the family of the old King Jaehaerys, who you see briefly at the beginning of the first episode. That was supposed to be the grand finale of everything, and it was. I got that out like the Saturday before the premiere, so I worked down to the wire on House of the Dragon stuff, using up all of the time I would have devoted to Lord of the Rings. That is why I haven't been covering this step by step during the summer. However, because Amazon is doing a terrible job of marketing this, trying to keep it a secret so that it'll build more interest, and we don't know what's going to happen, which is a terrible idea, but that's what they're doing. They've put out hardly any material for Lord of the Rings since February, so there wasn't that much to catch up on. That there was a full teaser trailer, which was basically just a better version of the Vanity Fair interview, but visualized. This should have been the first teaser, not the Super Bowl teaser. Then came the full trailer with San Diego Comic-Con. And then there was a final teaser that was slightly different. But if you were wondering after Comic-Con, why wasn't I reacting to the Lord of the Rings one, I was really backed up from that death, so I was frantically trying to cover House of the Dragon news. I had no time left over to do this. It wasn't that different story-wise. The only things I'd really say are, I'm pretty sure Meteor Man isn't Sauron now, because we see Sauron in a different form. We see him in his fair form as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. So he's probably someone else. Maybe Gandalf, outside chance of Tom Bombadil. Something like, and he's not Gandalf yet. He'd be in Olorin before he became Gandalf of the Third Age, that kind of thing. So, and it was fun seeing a Palantir in the Numenor scenes, and just Numenor in general, more shots of it. And they say Third Age is post-apocalyptic. Gondor is just this surviving colony of Numenor, and it's a fraction of its power. That Minas Tirith is like a border fort compared to what Numenor used to be. That looks like Minas Tirith, but taken to this grander, gigantic scale, as it should be. So there wasn't that much new stuff I could pick apart frame by frame from the trailers. So thankfully it was easy to catch up. And I made a playlist of all this on my channel. If you check my playlists of, these are all the promos we've had in 6 months. It was under 20 minutes of stuff. Then they put out 5 regional videos for Lindon, for Khazad-dûm, for Numenor, for the Harfoots in Rhovanion, and for the Southlands, which were nice, expanded a little on what we already knew from the Vanity Fair Super Bowl interview. The only big info that really, between that Super Bowl Vanity Fair thing and now, the biggest news to me was the Southlands regional video, in terms of new info of what they're doing with this, to me. Because all they said was the town in it is called Tir Harad, which means South Tower. And I thought, oh, it must be in Harad or in southern Gondor or something, and this is dealing with the Númenóreans conquering them. Now it looks like this is ancient Mordor. More accurately, I thought it was actually a clever idea, if it turns out to be true, that it's in South Mordor, in Nirn, which makes sense, that in the books, when they're trudging through the northwest plateau, Gorgoroth, which is the heart of Mordor, And Sam remarks, it's just a volcanic desert. What the hell do orcs eat? There aren't fields here. And the narrative pulls back, and Tolkien explains Sam couldn't know this, but he wouldn't know of the vast slave-tilled fields in southern Mordor. Well, the south and east. Gorgoroth is like the northwest corner, but below that plateau, there's this big inland sea called Lake Nurnen, and there's not a lot of rainfall, but you can have irrigation projects combined with it. The soil is very fertile from all the volcanic ash. That there's vast slave-tilled fields that feed the orc armies from humans and descendants of humans that they captured. That's what Nirn has already been a thing in other spin-offs like video games and stuff have visited. Oh, and here's the freed slaves in Nirn after the war ends and stuff. So I thought that was a clever way of showing that what was Mordor like before Sauron got there. It's not even necessarily, oh, this is Mordor before he was there. It's like the south parts that were never desert in the first place. That'll be interesting how they play that. But what really surprised me in that behind-the-scenes video is saying the humans there are locked up. It's like a reservation that they've been pushed onto. Because these are essentially the remnants of the Easterlings who sided with Morgoth after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. And that is a question of, like, after the War of Wrath, what did they do with surviving humans who had fought for Morgoth? And apparently they locked them away on reservations in Nirn, or in what became Mordor, because it's easy to pen them in there in the mountains. So this is entirely invention, but we'll see where they go with it, because it could have happened. That is a question. What happened to the Easterlings after Morgoth was defeated? The old Easterlings. Not because East relative to Beleriand is a relative term. Okay, and that the Sylvan Elves there kind of tasked to be their jailers, as it were, keeping them penned in that region. Ties in a bit more because this will turn into Mordor over time, and that Sauron does get the southern and eastern parts of the world under his sway over time, so that's, I wouldn't say I'm most concerned with, because they're all original characters. There's only so much they can contradict. But we'll see where they go with it. I wouldn't say it's a bad idea, but sorry to be going on for this for 20 minutes. This is my introduction / summarizing where have I been for the past 6 months. And there wasn't that much new. In 30 minutes I can summarize 6 months of news, because there wasn't that much. That I sat down September 1st, watched 20 minutes of promos. This is all the promo material we've gotten in 6 months. It's under 20 minutes. And then the 1-hour San Diego Comic-Con panel video hosted by the incomparable Stephen Colbert. And he's asking all the questions I would ask, like, oh, okay, Arondir is a Sylvan Elf. Is he a Nandor or a Navari? That's a serious question, but that's one for the writers. You shouldn't ask the actors. We don't know if the Sylvan Elves are Nandor or Avari. So I like that. I also watched when Morfydd Clark, I keep thinking Clark with an E, like Amelia. It's Clark without an E. Morfydd was on the Colbert Show. She seemed nice. Yes, Welsh is so much like Elvish, like your mother said, and she seems nice. She looks a lot like Cate Blanchett. Every video clip she's in, she looks and sounds like what Galadriel would be. I'm not opposed to Galadriel being a warrior. Again, that's okay. We know very little about what they're doing. I feel so bad that I'm so far behind in all this, but I had obligations to other things, and it got away from me, but I am here now. And I've already said in separate videos, I'm going to link a couple of videos below. This is not the battle of the fantasy titans between this and House of the Dragon, because they're different subgenres. Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. House of the Dragon is low fantasy. That Lord of the Rings is PG-13, House of the Dragon is rated R. And that isn't a knock on Lord of the Rings, that there's a lot of violent stuff in it, but it's weird coming back to Lord of the Rings after a decade of Game of Thrones stuff, where I hope we don't hold it against it, that it's not grimdark, sex and blood and violence stuff. The orcs are pretty violent. I put out one video in July about an interview I really liked about their design ideas for the orcs. And I thought, yeah, that's what the orcs would be doing when they were hiding after Morgoth was defeated at the end of the first age. This is encouraging, in design terms at least, and it's prosthetics. Again, it's not CGI. All of that was good for how they're treating the orcs as a thing. That just, my life hasn't been revolving around the Lord of the Rings show, because some people were blindly following it, some people were hating on it, depending on what news was coming out. I think it'll be like a pleasant video game. And they did say we planned out 50 episodes across, that there's supposed to be 5 seasons, about eight episodes each, depending on how they break it up. We'll see how they do that. This really shouldn't be a TV show. It's hard to do this as a TV show, because compared to House of the Dragon was a really long novella centered on one generation of characters. This is trying to be on a grander scale. House of the Dragon isn't even on the scale of Game of Thrones, where they go to different continents. They're not doing that in this. They are going from, in the first episode, just from the trailers, they're going from far away, the frozen waste in the north, to Harad in the south, to Numenor, to Khazad-dûm. All the worlds they're visiting, and with over 3 times the budget, you can do that, but it's very different. Versus House of the Dragon is more of an intimate story of one family, and the source material has a bit of dialogue in it. There is characterization. They're not really inventing new characters, but he sketched characters for it. It's in a universe history book. So many characters in the Lord of the Rings one will have to be invented. And I've read considerably. They put a lot of effort into getting the dialogue right. And I felt effort went into it, and they said, well, elves speak very formally, but in the trailers I've seen, it comes off a little stiff. But then again, that's how elves talked in the Lord of the Rings movies, so I don't know. I was always more fond of the dwarves, because they act like normal people, that they're stubborn, but generally, I wait and see how they do that. Officially, what are my biggest worries going ahead? Contradiction, that if you're messing around with Galadriel's characterization, they eventually need to set up Celeborn, and that, she is the mother-in-law of Elrond. That happens, uniting their houses, and with the contradiction stuff, I'm not too worried. I'm not too worried about a show that has Stephen Colbert's seal of approval. The one thing, if I had to pick one thing I'm worried about, is the time condensations, specifically with Numenor. Because the things that happen in the Numenor arc happen over many centuries. And like Sauron rose and came back well before the time of Ar-Pharazôn and Miriel and Elendil. Granted, Numenorians live a long time. They can live to be 200. That elves live forever and dwarves live to be 250. That the more you can do stuff with fudge the timeline with Galadriel and Elrond, because they're immortal, they're around for a long time. But when you get to mortal characters, you have to deal with, there's a specific time frame for this, and it condenses everything considerably. And so long as it works in television, for the purposes of a TV show, I'll wince and not really notice that this kind of actually takes place over 300 years. But they given it like 50 years in this, whatever. As long as it doesn't draw attention to itself. We'll see on that. So this is my introduction / catch up on everything that's been going on since the first teaser at the Super Bowl. Sorry about that. Things have been nuts on my end. And now here we are, the pandemic roared back with Omicron last winter. Now the new semester starting and everything with school and stuff, that we're officially moving on from that into it's in the background and still happening. But where do we go from here? And just getting back to not just talking about, jobs and the economy and stuff, but TV was shut down during the pandemic. And now we have all of these big fantasy shows coming out in a month of each other. Think about what's coming out this month. House of the Dragon, Lord of the Rings, and Neil Gaiman's Sandman all came out in a month of each other. And now that there used to be, there wasn't a lot of stuff. It was a dry spell because production shut down. And now all of the stuff that was left over on hold from the pandemic is now being dumped on us. And I don't know if nothing that tried to be the next Game of Thrones really achieved that. And Amazon said word for word, we want Lord of the Rings to be our Game of Thrones. For the past 3 to 5 years, everything that, even before Game of Thrones ended, things trying to be the new Game of Thrones never really panned out. There were a lot of flash in the pan things. Some things like Shadow and Bone were even decent because they were book series unto themselves. It's actually pretty popular among people who are, Netflix, the book fan base does like it. But in terms of mainstream trying to capture global attention, like The Witcher tried, and season 2 stumbled a little. I've heard bad things about the Wheel of Time adaptation on Amazon, but maybe they'll get better in season 2. We'll have to check that out. I don't know enough about it to really judge it, but there has been this giant race to get the next Game of Thrones, which dominated things in the mid-2010s. I don't see this as a competition. They're very different. I see them as complementing each other, because for too long, Game of Thrones had to deal with the bias of we're the only fantasy show that's trying to be a real drama, and that a rising tide lifts all boats, that we have the wide fantasy thing here. I don't know what's going on for other projects in the pipeline for major studios. I think these were the big ones, that there isn't anything else that's going to seriously try to compete with Lord of the Rings and House of the Dragon for the next 5 to 7 years. Because 5 more seasons doesn't mean they're going to keep cranking them out one season at a time. We're going to have like a 1.5 to 2 year break between seasons on these shows. I'm not sure, but I will be doing quick reactions to every episode. Now, I am recording this the weekend of September 2nd, right before I go and watch the first 2 episodes. I told you, I spent a day marathoning all the videos I was behind on for 6 months because my cat died, used up 2 months of my time, and then I had to dive into House of the Dragon stuff, so the time I would have been doing Lord of the Rings stuff got squeezed out. Thankfully, there wasn't that much. I spent a day marathoning all of it, and plus other reactions by other people analyzing these trailers. There wasn't that much. I'm turning this off. I'll edit it later. I am turning off this recording. This is a snapshot in time of my last thoughts on all of the promos right before I go and watch the first 2 episodes. Then I will immediately record a reaction to it. It'll take me some time to edit it, but this is okay. We're now in the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power era. Kind of had to hit the ground running because I used up all of my emergency time, but barely squeezing in managed to get things in there. So bear in mind, this is going to be audio only. I'm playing catch-up. I'm already doing so much House of the Dragon stuff because they don't have the infrastructure that Lord of the Rings has. That Lord of the Rings has a massive fan infrastructure behind it that the Game of Thrones stuff never had to begin with, and which got destroyed by the bad ending and bad final seasons with the TV show, and we've been rebuilding it ever since. And we've just been on hold as a fantasy franchise. Even Lord of the Rings, people heard, oh, there's stuff they're making in 2018, and then they didn't tell us anything for 3 years. I'm interested in seeing what they're doing. I do like the cast. They seemed nice at the San Diego Comic-Con panel. I'm not going to be able to watch every single thing they do. I will be trying to keep up with TheOneRing.net, InDeepGeek, Nerd of the Rings, and Fellowship of Fans. If there's other nice channels out there, please recommend them, but those are the big ones I rely on for what are people discussing right now from Lord of the Rings. I know a decent amount, and I know they will have to condense some things for TV, and because they don't have the rights to certain things that they can refer back to in the first age in detail. But this is about the second age, so I'm not really as into that. And above all, one thing hits me. I keep thinking about the shows that inspired us in like the 90s or even the 80s, like Labyrinth, like the not great animated Lord of the Rings things. But because there weren't other fantasy things coming out at the time, like the Neverending Story, well, the Neverending Story was actually pretty ambitious for its time, that looking back on the Neverending Story or Labyrinth, there's a lot of weird stuff in them that wouldn't hold up today. But when you think of a 5-year-old and 8-year-old watching these things, it inspired them. All the cheesy stuff that we watch, or like Dragon Slayer with Vermithrax Pejorative, that would seem kind of weird now, 80s stuff or even 90s stuff, but at the time they were the things that dreams were made of. And Amazon put out that corny trailer of the 10-year-olds being inspired by it, but one way or another, millions of people are going to watch this show, and it will shape their, and maybe repopularize Middle-earth stuff, and for the 10 to 15-year-olds of today, this will be their cheesy 1980s stuff that inspired their childhood, that shapes what heights they'll go on to. So I'm seeing it as, a ripple in a chain, like a story round, which is, what Tolkien said, that some things in my thing are just outlines for other writers, that this will inspire the next generation of young people. If only in its scale, if only in its visuals, it won't reach the same heights as Lord of the Rings. I don't expect it to. I never did. I thought it'd be like a pleasant video game. But think of the impact this is going to have. It won't quite be the impact that the Lord of the Rings trilogy had, because that was a trilogy of very high-quality, big-budget movies released annually. That was unusual, and just that public, large-scale, not everyone watches Amazon Prime. And it was really, really good. So, that was the thing of our youth 20 years ago. It's been a while, and I was in college when they were coming out, but not to the extent that the original Lord of the Rings trilogy inspired us, but like how TV tie-ins for other things people were inspired by. The visuals, if only because it was out there and really prominent. This will have impact. And another thing is, this is unprecedented. The writers are facing a difficult task. There isn't a lot of writing, a lot of dialogue for them to write. And they have to pull together very disparate. Compared to adapt, this is officially harder to adapt than House of the Dragon. It was a focused story. This isn't. Maybe they'll refine this by season 2. That we tend to judge things, and it's only a 5-season thing, but I'm usually pretty forgiving that maybe they'll refine some things by the second season. There's going to be some rough edges, okay? As long as the core stuff isn't contradicting giant things that are to the spirit of Tolkien. They might even fudge some dates. The Numenor stuff I'm really worried about. The time condensations, particularly with Numenor, because they're humans, they're mortal. Those are my biggest issue. But as I said back in February, it's just so weird. It's like I'm having mental flashbacks to when my cat was still alive, when I was sitting there petting him, writing up my thing for this. It's weird how time passes. Just here we are, and we'll see what happens. That there's this whole new era opening up with all of these new shows starting up. 3 giant shows right now. I'm not sure what other franchises are still considered going on, and just all of the thought that we went into this and what we're expecting from it. Sorry, I know I'm rambling. It's just, I'm nervous about watching. I'm going to turn this off and start recording what we hope to see from it. That it was weird that everyone was so hyped going up to the Super Bowl. Then the massive backlash, which was 6 months ago, wasn't that long ago. And then the book fan sites going, no, it actually sounds good when you actually get the interviews. And now we're kind of at a tilting point where there's criticism even though it hasn't even aired yet. And I don't know if some people still have blind faith that I will judge what I see. It might be pleasant, and it doesn't need to be as big or successful as Lord of the Rings to still be a successful tie-in TV show. I don't think it'll recapture the national zeitgeist. When they say that everyone's talking about, did you watch Game of Thrones last night, or did you watch Breaking Bad? I don't think it'll be that, and that's an unrealistic goal that Amazon Prime set for itself. But we might have fun talking about this on a nerdy level, that I'm not even trying to think of big long-term stuff anymore. Just, I'm taking it 1 week at a time. And I'm really interested in what everyone else has to say. It's like right before Christmas when you're worried about what's inside of the box before you open it. I don't know. But that summarizes the past 6 months of my channel with this, that yes, I would like to talk about this. We're doing the House of the Dragon stuff, that it's just, I'm so nervous about the uncertain future with all of these prequels. But I will be trying to review everything as it comes out, just giving my own personal thoughts on it, as if you watch House of the Dragon, you'll probably also want to at least check out Lord of the Rings, Whether you like it or hate it, you'd want to see what they're doing out of curiosity. So that's pretty much where things stand now, and we will be doing this combined, not Battle of the Fantasy Titans, through the end of October, and then we will look back early November and see, we'll assess, this is the thing, these are the two things we were waiting 3 years for. What does the future hold now? And a lot of thoughts to go on this. I'm hitting the off button now, and I'm going to watch the first 2 episodes, and I'll make a longer ramble about what I think on this.